the story of the Gadarene Demoniac. Scene one, the strong man at home. They came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gadarenes, the other side of the Sea of Galilee. They came to a region that's down in the southeast. It's called the region of the Gadarenes. It's also rendered sometimes the Gerasenes. It's the same place. The place was called sometimes Gerasa or Cursa. If you looked at it on a map, it's kind of down on the opposite end of the Sea of Galilee, where the disciples have otherwise been occupied, up in the region of Capernaum. This was part of what was called the Decapolis. You know, the word Decapolis means 10 cities. It was independent. It was not under Jewish authority. It was a Gentile region, and these 10 cities were styled something like Hellenistic city-states. When Alexander swept across the world, the Mediterranean world, a couple of hundred years earlier, he created city-states, and that was seen as kind of the great paradigm of the perfect social life, you know. And so these are supposed to be sort of Hellenistic city-states. But the thing we should notice about it is fundamentally an unclean place. It is unclean in several respects. It is, first of all, under unclean rule. The authority that's working there is not Jewish authority, it is Roman authority. It is a Gentile province, not a true province, but an area, a region. It was created by the Roman general Pompey in 63 BC, when after his defeat of Mithridates up in Pontus, he swept down through the Levant, he came to Jerusalem and found Jerusalem locked in a civil war between John Hyrcanus II, who was the descendant of the Hasmonean dynasty and a descendant of the Maccabeans from the Maccabean revolt. He was in a conflict with the man who had kind of usurped control of Jerusalem, who was his brother-in-law, you know. And so Jerusalem is locked in this struggle, and Pompey shows up with all the power of his Roman military might, and he makes a deal with John Hyrcanus II. He says, okay, man, I'll help you, but only on the basis of certain stipulations, one of which is that region off to the southeast of the Sea of Galilee is going to become Roman. You've had it under your control, it's going to be ours. We're going to set up a little model of Roman wonder. And this is going to be a centerpiece. We don't know why Pompey wanted to do that exactly. He might have been trying to buttress the eastern frontier of Rome against the Parthians, who were further to the east. Maybe he was trying to show up the Jewish world, which seemed a little eccentric to him, and he wanted to show how much superior the Romans were. We don't know. But the point is, he had this little region, and so just in the backyard of Israel was a region that was conspicuously Gentile, even though it was contiguous with the Sea of Galilee, and thus it was viewed as having an unclean authority at work. Of course, the dominant personality we encounter as the story begins is a man with an unclean spirit. It's a violent man, and he is dominating the region, which is supposed to say to us, this is the effect of this satanic influence in this world. It's an influence leading to anarchy, to violence, to loss of control, to disorder, to disintegration. And this man is a wonderful picture of how that evidence shows up. He lives, to make matters worse, among tombs, which are on the face of it an unclean situation to the Jewish point of view. Tombs contaminated you. Graveyards were to be avoided. They were the place of death and uncleanness, and yet this man lives in this unclean place. Death, defilement, saying almost, maybe if I am not stretching the point too far, that's the effect once again that the satanic strong man has had in this world. In some ways you'd say this region of Gerasa was a microcosm of the whole world. Satan came in, he made the whole world dirty. He made it a graveyard. He made it a place full of dead folks. Jesus said, I came that they might have life. You know, if someone said that to you, I'm coming to bring life, you'd probably assume they're going to a place where people are dead, you see. And that's exactly what Jesus did. He came to a place where people were dead to give them life. And in a sense, this tomb, this graveyard, stands maybe for the whole cosmos here that had become locked in death. And then just to add a little icing to the cake, there's unclean animals. Swine, pigs, the most notorious unclean beasts to the Jewish sensibility are feeding there within a stone's throw of where Jesus shows up. So he's walking into a situation which is screaming the uncleanliness of the thing from the Jewish point of view. And here he is showing up on the shore. We would say, in short, this is a microcosm of the kingdom of Satan and a place to prevent any disruption of its unclean status quo. You know, being unclean can be good for business. You can sell a lot of product on the premise of people's addictions, people's desperate need for a sense of well-being, for their fundamental feeling of brokenness and uncleanness. You can peddle an awful lot of stuff. And in some ways, it was bad for business to have Jesus come as a cleanup operation. Who knows what was going to happen to the revenue stream by the time this was over? Well, Jesus arrives. He came out of the boat. Immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. The way that Mark puts this, the man out of the tombs met him. We're not supposed to take this as meet and greet, you know. This is not him saying, oh, how do you do? My name is Demons, what is your name? And this is not just a little casual conversation over coffee. This is more meeting on the field of battle, you know. Met him with the sense implied in it that this demonic presence is intending to defend against the unclean province that is under his control. Jesus said on one occasion, the gates of hell will not prevail. Those are defensive gates. That is hell under siege. And they've slammed the gates shut in the hopes of keeping out King Jesus. And in a sense, we have here portrayed in almost a dramatic way that idea. This guy's coming out to meet, in a resistive kind of way, the onslaught of King Jesus. Mark gives us, in this discussion, the most detailed exorcism in the entire Gospel of Mark. And it's the most detailed description of an exorcism anywhere in the Bible. Mark devotes a lot of attention to this because he doesn't want us to miss the point. I think it's most likely the case that Mark is giving us this lengthy, dramatic portrayal of Jesus coming to the province of a strong man to give us, in a sense, a presentation of the meaning of that statement Jesus made back in chapter 3. In the context of the whole discussion of Beelzebub and all of those accusations, Jesus makes a statement which for Mark is a repeating theme. It comes up again and again, and this may be the most dramatic occasion of it. Jesus says, no man can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man, then he can plunder his house. And of course, clearly in that context, Jesus is referring to Satan as this strong man, a thug who took over from the Garden of Eden on when he deceived the human race into giving him subservience. And on behalf of the whole order under which they were ruling over, they had dominion. You know, their whole kingdom was, in a sense, placed in the control of Satan. He became the prince of the power of the air. Didn't do a real good job. The world became a messy place. And now finally Jesus comes to take back. But how do you take back the belongings of a thug? You don't sue him, you bind him. You put him in a straitjacket. You wrap him in duct tape and you take his stuff. That's what you do. And that's kind of the flavor of what is being suggested in Jesus' statement here, and it's what's being portrayed, in a sense, by this amazingly strong man who breaks chains, who can't be bound, who is unbindable. But Jesus comes to bind him, you see. And this whole portrayal of a strong man being bound is being given us almost in a sort of stage play kind of approach. He has an unclean spirit. At the heart of this unclean place is a terrorist. He breeds only violence, chaos, destruction. You can hear his haunting shouts and screams off in the distance. Can you imagine mothers putting their kids to bed at night and they hear off in the distance through the open window that awful sound? And little kids are terrified by it, but what do? It's just the way things are. And there it is, haunted by this character who is fundamentally locked in an unclean kind of commitment. Mark continues his detailed description. He had his dwelling among the tombs. No one could bind him, not even with chains. So his home is among the dead, a place which in the ancient world and to some degree even today was viewed as a place of dark mystery, of dread, of superstition, of occult arts, of demons, of horrifying imagination. All of this, even the Talmud, reflects something of that. In such places where evil spirits resort, there is occasion for fear. This is the Jewish authorities speaking to the question. More to the point, however, no one could bind him. This is language very intentionally used by Mark. There had been many attempts to bind him. It wasn't as if he couldn't be bound for lack of trying. They'd put him in chains. They'd done everything they could, and he broke the chains. He was unruly and uncontrollable. History is filled with failed attempts to meet force with greater force, violence with greater violence, terror with greater terror. This is our only practical solution to that seething anarchy that seems to be always there. I remember when I first was practicing law in the early 80s. You could walk in any door of the Spokane County Courthouse. No guards, no metal, no nothing. You just walked in. You could go anywhere in that building. No restrictions. By the time I was done practicing law, about 20 years later, early 2000s, you could only walk in one door, and you walked up to a very big-looking person that didn't look too friendly, and you walked through a metal detector, and you had all kinds of restrictions. What happened in 20 years? And that was about 20 years ago. Has it gotten better in the meantime? When a society begins to politely excuse Jesus from the public square, friends, what comes in its wake is seething anarchy. What comes in its wake is a simmering witch's brew of anarchy that hides just beneath the surface of polite society, threatening to break out at any moment. Haven't we seen some of that in the last few days here in Washington State, let alone everywhere else? And we keep wondering, what's happening? It's because Satan made a mess of this world, and the only one who can bind the strong man is a stronger man. And all of our attempts to create increasing totalitarianism are not going to get the job done. But we keep trying, as they had kept trying, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains. And the chains had been pulled apart by him, and the shackles broken in pieces. Neither could anyone tame him. This man was out of control. They tried. If you think about this man, he sounds a bit like Samson, doesn't he? Samson, in the Old Testament, was often bound with chains. They'd tie him up with ropes. But in fact, when we hear about Samson back in the book of Judges, we learn he would break those chains off. In his case, he was energized by nothing less than the Ruach Yahweh, the Spirit of the Lord. And this was God's man, an uncontrollable, quintessential strong man in the Old Testament. Now we have a kind of anti-Samson, a strong man not energized by heaven, but energized by hell, terrorizing everyone except Jesus. You see? Mark makes an interesting little note here, only in Mark. No one could tame him. Usually when we hear the word tame, we think of an uncontrollable beast, don't we? You try to domesticate a beast. You try to tame a beast. Mark, of course, as we've said before, is writing to Christian people, very probably facing the terrorist known as Nero. He just happened to be the emperor at the same time. The most famous sort of image of this man was he was a beast. That's what I believe the book of Revelation calls him, a beast. A diabolical character who could not be tamed. He liked to dress up as a beast. Nero, we're told by Tacitus and others, would sometimes put on the garments of a beast with big horns and go out for entertainment's value and gore people to death as a beast. Once upon a time he did that to his own pregnant wife. That's the kind of beast this guy was, and he was the one that was turning his guns of terror on perfectly innocent Christian people, accusing them falsely of crimes they hadn't committed and treating them to the most ghastly forms of persecution. And they viewed him as a beast that could not be tamed, an uncontrollable strong man who was utterly outside the bounds of any kind of meaningful control. And Mark just throws in passing here, no one could tame this strong man in the Gadarene region, and hoping that they'd connect the dots. Conclusion, always, night and day, he was in the mountains and the tombs crying out and cutting himself with stones. Here is dark, terrifying, uncontrolled self-destructiveness of Satan, his rule, his kingdom, and a microcosm of it. And this is the strong man at home. Who could ever plunder his goods? Who could ever break through this powerful defense? How could it ever happen that there could be a defeat of this one? Scene 2, the strong man under siege. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshiped him. I didn't bring my watch today, so I'm looking at my wife's watch. Why is it that women's watches are completely impossible to read? You know? And my eyes aren't good, so the closer I get, the less I see, so I don't know. I think it's about 20 till. Am I right? Is it about 20 till? Are we good? Okay. I have to pace myself because I get excited, you know, and so I want to end when I'm supposed to here. All right. When he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and worshiped him. Now, the word worshiped is not quite worshiped. It's more he bowed down before him or fell before him. And again, it still has this notion of a kind of defensive maneuver. This is certainly not warm-hearted worship. I think you all can gather that. Mark says he saw Jesus from afar. Let's assume that he's about 500 yards away, all right? So, you know, you can see, but it's probably out in the distance. If we were there as ordinary human beings, possessed of our 5 senses, and we saw Jesus and some guys getting out of a boat down on the shore, we would have thought, oh, there's some guys getting out of a boat, you know, and that would have been the end of it, and we probably would have disregarded the whole thing. But the demon sees what we don't see. This I last year referred to as something like Frodo's ring. You know, if you put on the ring, everything changes. You're still in the same spot, but all of a sudden you see all that's going on, the cosmic conflict, principalities, powers, mights, dominions, good, evil, at war, all around you. Then you take off the ring, it all goes away. Well, not really. It's still there. We just don't see it. The demon sees it. So while we just see a guy getting out of a boat, the demon sees the Lord of glory, the majesty of this one, this God among us getting out of a boat. And he immediately knows he's got a problem on his hands. The rest of us don't see it. He does. So he ran and literally fell down before him. And the sense of it really is He's the defender of hell, wanting to resist, and he uses several tactics. And if you read this thoughtfully, you see that the demon keeps trying different strategies, trying to resist Jesus who is coming. This is the, in a sense, second attempt already. Maybe that diabolical storm that took place out on the sea was the first attempt to keep Jesus away. And now, having failed of that one, this demon-possessed man. He cried out with a loud voice and said, "What have I to do with you, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you or adjure you by God that you do not torment me." This is an idiom. We run into it more than once in the New Testament, and it's a little difficult to translate. What do I have to do with you? It's really more just, what is this? What are you doing here? You see, it's that kind of thing. This isn't your place. One commentator really got off on this and the way in which in church history, as God's people have been about the business of proclaiming the crown rights of King Jesus in various places in this world where he wasn't really welcome, he's been treated to a lot of a similar kind of response. What are you doing here? Leave us alone. Haven't you heard of separation of church and state, you know? We have our naturalistic orthodoxy, our entertainment industry, our educated neutrality, our political pragmatism. This is ours, not yours. Go back to church. Go back to Israel. Go back to where you belong. This is our place, not yours. That's kind of the demon's first response. You don't belong here. This is none of your business. Mind your own business. The demon is hoping maybe just by kind of rattling his saber a little bit, he can make this guy go away. This commentator noted that the response of Jesus, at least impliedly, has been the response of God's people down through history. Sorry, pal, all authority is given unto me. Not just religious authority, mystical authority, otherworldly authority, irrelevant authority. No, all authority. And so I do have business here. Thank you very much. The demon calls Jesus Son of the Most High God. That is not a Jewish name. That's a common term used in pagan polytheism. And again, it would have been quite meaningful to the readers of Mark's gospel who are living in that kind of broader culture. Jesus has been being given the name of a deity, but as it were in a kind of a pagan nomenclature. Most interesting, the demon says, "I implore you," and the word is actually adjure. It's a technical word that means to demand from a person an oath for one's own security, but based on some kind of obligation of the person from whom the demand is being made. In the Old Testament, it frequently will come with the formula, "Swear to me that. Swear to me that you won't do this or that." In fact, Samson himself, on one occasion, when the Philistines are after him and he's hiding out in a rocky outcropping in Jewish territory, the Philistines come and say, "The man's a criminal, we want him, extradite him to us." The Jewish people come and say, "Hey, the Philistines want you. Come with us peaceably." Samson says, "Swear to me that you won't try to kill me yourselves." Samson wants to save his supernatural power for the proper targets of it. You know, he doesn't want to do damage to his own people. Swear to me that they had an obligation to do that. Okay, we swear. And then they were bound by that. In a sense, that's what the demon is doing, almost as if Jesus was under some kind of obligation, you see, some kind of duty that the demon is appealing to. Mark doesn't make it very clear what that duty might be. Matthew adds a detail here that might help. Matthew's version of the same statement goes like this, "And suddenly they cried out, saying, 'What do we have to do with you, Jesus, Son of God?'" See, that's more a Jewish title. "Have you come here to torment us before the time?" And maybe the demons have this idea that Jesus is premature. Jesus has said to them, "Come out of him." And almost interrupting this, that's in the imperfect tense. As Jesus was saying, "Come out of the man," the demon protests. "Wait a minute. You're here too soon. Have you come to torment us before the time, prematurely?" There was an idea, you see, that Jesus would come at a certain, or that the Messiah would come at a certain moment and with him would come the kingdom, but it hadn't happened yet. And maybe Jesus is just jumping the gun a little bit. So the demon wants to kind of lock Jesus down. Swear to me that, this or that in that connection. The demon is almost protesting what you might be calling a demand for his Miranda rights, wait a minute. I have the right to a lawyer, come on. And you almost get the feeling that he's maneuvering in that sort of way. The first ploy, this is none of your business. The second ploy, you're here too early. Jesus has an interesting response to that one. He says, what's your name? You ever notice when someone asks you your name, it kind of puts them in the position of the authority? What's your name? Jesus comes to take names, and he's taking names here, as if to say, no, sorry, I know you're trying to say that it's too soon, whatever, what's your name? Because we're about to deal with you, and there's no sense in which your claim that I should swear to you anything is going to be met with any compromise on my part. So Jesus displays this kind of calm confidence in the face of what is otherwise a terrifying presence. He responds, my name is Legion. A legion was a Roman military unit numbering around 6,000. Meaningful once again, of course, to the readers of Mark's gospel. One commentator thought, and I thought this was kind of fun, he said, 6,000 demons in one person would give you a little bit of a bad case of schizophrenia. You are being dragged in a whole lot of different directions all at once. And it is a very disintegrating thing. And he talked about modern society and how much people devote themselves to all kinds of disparate ultimate causes. I don't want to step on anyone's toes this morning. I'm just doing this by way of illustration. But you know that in our culture alone, we have people who are passionately concerned about animal rights, and people who are passionately concerned about the environment, and people who are passionately concerned about, whether our food has been genetically modified, and people who are passionate, and they have these, and yet, how does a culture hang together when you've got so many different ultimate causes? Is there any way to find some common denominator that brings balance? We should be worried about the environment. That's fine. We should be concerned about animal rights. The beginning of the animal rights movement came out of the Second Great Awakening in England in 1810. Thank you very much. We Christians are the one who paved the way for animal rights. But when that becomes your God, when it leads you away from everything else, that kind of disruption tears a person apart, tears a culture apart. What pulls it together? Only the one in whom all things consist. Only the one who can bring that root of order in the middle of so much disorder. So I hope I've roughly paraphrased what my commentator friend said. I don't think it's about that, though. Actually, I think it's about something else. Legion is more to communicate here strength. He's a strong man. The unit of the Roman military, the definition of its strength was the legion. And that does seem to be what's implied. So the Gadarene Demoniac begged him earnestly that he would not send him out of the country. Here's the third ploy, just plead for mercy. The demon has tried, this is none of your business. He's tried, swear to me that. And now, almost in desperation, he just begs, crying, please don't send me out of the country. Not exactly sure what is implied by sending out of the country, but I think the best guess is that the demon wanted to avoid being assigned whatever final judgment might look like. So we'll leave it there. Scene 3, the strong man is banished. We hear that there's a herd of swine, 2,000, some distance away. Swine, of course, are notoriously the most unclean of the animals from the Jewish perspective. However, it's well known that this unclean food was marketed by Jewish merchants to the Roman soldiers who lived in Israel. And so even though it was above their dignity to eat the stuff, they had no problem making a buck off its distribution. And so that may be one of the subtexts of this story. Some have suggested that. Anyway, the demon says, "Send us to the swine that we may enter them." This is the fourth ploy. Compromise. Look, okay. We'll let this guy alone. But how's about we just go over there with those pigs? That'd be okay, wouldn't it? No problem there. And it does seem, oddly enough, that Jesus allows it. He says, okay, deal. At once Jesus gave them permission. Then the unclean spirits went out, entered the swine, there were about 2,000, and the herd ran violently down the steep place into the sea and drowned in the sea. The anarchy in the man becomes anarchy in the swine. The detail here that's often missed is the swine are driven into the sea. So unclean spirits inhabiting unclean animals are, in a sense, in the imagery of the description, thrown back into the sea. And another word that's commonly used in the biblical narrative for the sea is the abyss. Now, this is the Sea of Galilee. This is kind of a poetic treatment of this. I'm not denying that it actually happened, but I want you to get the idea. They're thrown into the sea. In the Old Testament and throughout the Bible, the sea and the abyss are kind of identified, often with Gentile powers, where chaos, where darkness, where the deep, where dread haunts. It's viewed as a kind of prison of disorder, chaos, mystery, dark rule, the abyss. There's this idea that the powers of darkness are trying to escape the abyss into the world of humanity. So if you could picture this dark place in which you have imprisoned these dark forces trying to sneak out. That's probably behind the text in Revelation chapter 9. John says, "I saw a star that fell from the sky to the earth. The star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss. When he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke from a gigantic furnace. The earth and sky were darkened by the smoke from the abyss. Out of the smoke, locusts came down upon the earth and were given power like that of scorpions of the earth." It's an awful sight. And how did it start? The abyss was opened. And unleashing, you see, these dark, imprisoned forces. In a sense, the story here is Jesus sent them back where they belong, back into the abyss, back into the sea, and their unclean animals with them. This is no compromise. This is simply banishment. Revelation chapter 20, I believe, is carrying out the same theme and really is, in a sense, an echo of this statement. "And I saw an angel coming down from heaven having the key to the abyss and holding in his hand a great chain. He seized the dragon, that ancient serpent, who is the devil or Satan, and what? Bound him. Bound him. You can't plunder a strong man's house unless you bind him. Bound him for an extended period of time, the era of the gospel. He threw him into the abyss and locked and sealed it over him so that he couldn't deceive the nations anymore." In a sense, we have a dramatic portrayal of locking and sealing him in the abyss. All of these powers are gone. And it brings us to the fourth scene. The stronger man is proclaimed. Those who fed the swine fled and told it in the city and in the country, and they went out to see what had happened. They fled. They're the first missionaries, unwitting, to be sure. They're mainly worried to exculpate themselves because they don't want anyone to blame them for those lost swine in the sea. Everybody comes out to see. The spectacle draws a crowd. When they came to Jesus and saw the one who had been demon-possessed and had the legion clothed, sitting in his right mind, they were afraid. Motivated probably by curiosity rather than reverence, they can't come and they see this astonishing sight. Madness is replaced by calm. The man is sitting in a right posture, clothed with right human dignity, sane, in his right mind, you would think they'd give him a ticker tape parade. You'd think they'd give him the key to the city. They'd have a national Jesus Day right there on the spot. No, they were afraid. The disciples were afraid when Jesus calmed the storm. These people are afraid when Jesus calms a different storm. So they fear Jesus more than they fear a shrieking, uncontrollable madman. You see. It is interesting to me how much sanity is fearful to some people. Do you realize some people are terrified of quiet? Have you ever met someone like that? They won't allow quiet. If no one else is talking, they'll talk. Bum, 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 bum. No quiet! Because quiet can be frightening. The book written some years back, Amusing Ourselves to Death. Muse is to think. To amuse is to prevent myself from thinking. And we sort of live in a world that's constantly clamoring to keep us from thinking, from feeling the quiet, the calm of actual sober sanity, because that can be terrifying. We have a whole culture that's wrapped up in the noise of TVs and radios and media and all of this stuff trying to keep us distracted from what matters. And these folks were terrified by the sanity. Those who saw it told them how it had happened to him who had been demon-possessed and about the swine. They are the unwitting missionaries proclaiming this news of the stronger man. And then finally, this interesting and somewhat unexpected detail at the end. Then they began to plead with him to depart from their region. These guys didn't want the sanity, the sensibility, the quiet, the calm to interrupt the status quo. So please, Jesus, would you mind just getting out of town? The status quo of revenue, with its madness, chaos, and dread, was better than sober-minded, calm, better to lose Jesus than to lose profit. Church history is filled with similar examples. The father of the modern missionary movement, William Carey, proposed going to India with the gospel. The first resistance he ran into was in his own church. Sit down, young man. If God wants to convert the heathen, he can do it without any help from you or me. That was William Carey's first reception of his idea. He nevertheless mustered up the support. When he was halfway to India, about a year and a half later, he was met, and actually his boat was confiscated, not by Indians who were resisting him, but by the British East India Company, who did not want the gospel preached because it would enlighten those folks and it would be bad for business. You see, how much of human history has been a question of having Jesus depart from the region because it's bad for business. A member of Parliament in the 1930s in England said, quote, "God pity the British Empire if it's to run on the principles of the Sermon on the Mount." You know, that is too much. As he was getting into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. It's an understandable request. This man has been delivered from the most ferocious, awful circumstance, and he wants to be with Jesus. Jesus is not fighting. He's getting into a boat. He's going to leave amicably. You want me to leave? I'll leave. You reject Jesus? He'll leave, you know. But this man is begging. The crowds beg to leave. The man begs to stay. And Jesus now surprises us. He did not permit him, but said, "You go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he has had compassion on you." Why not? Some thoughts. The man was a Gentile, and Jesus' primary mission at this moment was to the Jewish nation. That's probably at least a preliminary idea. Jesus had been banished from the region, but not this man. He's a Gentile. He has a story to tell, and he's not sworn to secrecy. You know, Jesus usually tells people, don't say anything to anybody about this. You know how Jesus usually says that? Not this time. You go tell. You go ahead, shout it from the housetops, the good things that have been done for you. Maybe more importantly, in just 2 or 3 chapters, Jesus is going to come back to this very spot. He's going to come back to the Decapolis. And then he will get his ticker tape parade. Then he will be received by the masses. Then he will be celebrated with rock star status. Then the crowds are going to come to him and welcome him and bring their sick and bring their demon-possessed and bring all of those with maladies, and they will come desperate to see him. What made the difference? The preaching of one missionary who only went out and told his story, you see. Then he departed and began to proclaim in the Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and they all marveled. So the man healed becomes the man missionary. I've got 15 seconds to give you my Sunday school lesson. Here it comes. Hang on. Public and private gates of hell continue to resist Jesus, and the assault is still going on. Jesus said the gates of hell will not prevail against the work of my church, but those gates continue to try. Every Christian, every one of us in this room, is part of a team of special ops, anointed by Christ with the power to bring our attack on those gates. Now, I don't know where those gates are in your life. There may be private gates of hell. Habits you've got, attitudes you have. It may be public gates of hell. Institutions that want anything but to have Jesus show up. But wherever it is, locate those gates of hell and realize that God has given you the same power that he gave to his own followers to bring their siege works against those gates. Satan is, in any event, a bound and defeated foe. When Jesus died on the cross, when he rose from the dead, it was over. And wherever the name of Christ is named and with integrity the gospel is preached, Satan runs for cover. There is no conflict. There's no battle between light and darkness. Light always wins. The lights are on in here. Do you see a battle going on? Is darkness trying to take over? I don't think so. You see, the light always wins. The light is more powerful than the dark. The weapon of the kingdom is not bazookas. We're not going to machine gun people into faith. It ain't going to happen. The weapon of the kingdom is the sword that comes out of the mouth of the rider on the horse. And the Bible is absolutely full of that language. This is just one very typical example, Isaiah 4. But with righteousness he shall judge the poor and decide with equity for the meek of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth, and with the breath of his lips he shall slay the wicked. So our tactics are tactics of relying on this, which is God's authority among us, to beat back the gates of hell, just as Jesus did one day in the region of the Gerasenes.